Christiaan Hund has been the curator of the Sanlam Art Collection since 1997. Since his appointment, the collection has expanded with additions of some 500 artworks dating from late 19th century to the present. The collection boasts a representative overview of South African art valued conservatively at 158 million. As curator, Hund is also responsible for exhibitions. Over the past decade, he has been responsible for regular exhibitions at the Sanlam Art Gallery, as well as regular national travelling exhibitions that have showcased the Sanlam Art Collection and first-time solo exhibitions by under-recognised artists. Prior to his appointment at Sanlam, he served as the curator of the Oliewenhuis Art Museum, a satellite of the National Museum in Bloemfontein, as you should know. He continues to practice as an art historian, publishing articles on corporate collecting and catalogues featuring the Sanlam Art Collection and selected artists. For the past 20 years, he has played an active role in the South African art world, 16 of which have been dedicated to expanding the Sanlam's investment in its arts collection. Hund also leads the Sanlam Private Investments Art Advisory Service, which was launched in September 2010. It is the first of its kind in South Africa. The Art Advisory Service helps investors choose artworks that are likely to enjoy good returns, as well as set up an art portfolio that forms part of an investor's overall portfolio. Hund holds a BA in Fine Arts with honours from the University of the Witwatersrand and studied History of Art at the University of Cape Town. Thank you, Stefan.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's welcome. It's once again for me a privilege and delight to be at the Oliewenhuis Art Museum to open an exhibition. Coming here always raises mixed feelings, having worked here before, but I would say that my overall sentiment when I come here is always very positive. It's a delight to visit a museum that thrives in a context where many public institutions have become victims of neglect, vandalism, or simple plundering. I'm sure many of you may have heard of this dire state that the Johannesburg Art Gallery is in, as some vandals removed the roof of parts of the museum that had just been restored, and the museum is now closed. So we're very privileged to be in a museum of this kind that over the years has been maintained, looked after, and expanded. And it's good to see that people still support it so well. And in this sense, I'm really happy to see an exhibition like this being put in this space, as it gives credibility to the practice of art and the necessity to show it. I think that the Johannesburg population at this stage has been so severely deprived of a very necessary institution in that city. But let's not dwell on the unfortunate realities of our country, but rather take a view of this exhibition, which is perhaps for many people equally disquieting, particularly in its title. Paradisus, Deperditum, Paradise Lost, or Gone, or Finished, perhaps even. Taken on face value, the title evokes a type of melancholy pessimism, perhaps. Although the expulsion from paradise is presented as one of the first catastrophes for humankind, it marked the beginning of the evolution of man, the cornerstone of the edifice that would evolve into a growing, in inverted commas, cathedral of knowledge, philosophy, and the arts. What one may loosely and with reservation call civilization. Paradise in this narrative is temporarily out of bounds, but not lost, gone, or finished. It still somehow remains a concept in everybody's mind. It remains, in a sense, the grand narrative of progress, always present and possibly attainable. However, we cannot reclaim our innocence and re-enter paradise while we still live. It is only attainable through the complete loss of life. Christiaan Diedericks' title is therefore not as pessimistic as it may appear to be. It removes the possibility and the existence of paradise perhaps completely and forever. This grand narrative of the paradise that we seek is no longer, it has no credibility, and the possibility for meaningful exploitation other than marking its own absence. Yet out of this absence arises the fundamental capacity and responsibility for humanity to realize its own destiny. On a more personal level, Christiaan states, and I quote, "My chosen title is hence derived from the alarming fact that our ecosystem is severely disrupted, the financial system increasingly uncontrollable, and the geopolitical structure has recently begun to appear as unstable as it has always been uneven. This triple crisis infuses doubt and inspires reflection about our basic assumptions, as much as inflaming cultural debates and provoking dogmatic entrenchments. History, it seems, is moving rapidly beyond its all too hastily proclaimed end. As a serious contemporary artist, I am continuously seeking answers inside myself and through my creative output for alarming issues." Christiaan's engagement with these issues is not direct or straightforward, but perhaps allegorical. The visual text, as he describes it, is not necessarily intelligible for every viewer, and perhaps deliberately so. In many instances, one may initially be confounded by the juxtapositions as one is often confronted with in later and early Renaissance paintings, where the meanings may have been deliberately disguised to be only accessible to a few of the initiated. However, Christiaan's allegories are not secure texts for the initiated alone, and they remain open-ended, inviting an enriching debate between the viewer and the artist. For those of you who missed his walkabout, that debate, I understand, was quite animated at times, but certainly insightful. Christiaan's most recent work, an installation of 30 deadly virtues, is exemplary of this. One is confronted with a circle of 30 beautifully constructed, or let's say cast, human skulls, some of them highly polished and decorated, others visibly rough and prickly in some instances. The skull is a quintessential symbol of vanity in the Western tradition, not necessarily a deadly sin. These are the porters for a proposed set of deadly virtues, inviting the viewer to reflect and self-reflect on the nature of the particular virtue and its possible consequences, which undoubtedly would be death. Christiaan provides some clue as to the deadliness of these virtues by adding images or accoutrements which operate at times very directly or ironically, such as the fake gemstones and pearls that adorn the skulls of knowledge and zeal, or the sinking ship that adorns the skull of hope, and the word forever, which is emblazoned on the white skull of idealism. Placed in a circle, they seem to present a type of shamanic divination tool in a way. And speaking to Christiaan now, he gave me a little more of an insight into the circular nature of it, saying that they are 30 because 30 is a number associated with a circle, also associated with cycles. And he pointed out to the cycles of our financial system in a way. So in a sense, that circle of skulls lying in a type of red blood altar, which one bows down to inspect, and you need to look down. I think you could read the label, of course, but looking at it closely would help. Puts you in a particular position where you really have to contemplate your own position in terms of those virtues and look at your own history as to what of those virtues actually were usable in your own life and still today. There is, of course, something both beautiful and disconcerting when confronted with these images, which is a deliberate strategy adopted by Christiaan, which is even more distinct in the other skull installations as blood, sweat, and tears. One cannot avoid seeing these as modern reliquaries that ironically claim their presence in our life today, without allegiance to religious dogma. So the one on the right here called ancient slavery, and the one on the left called modern or maybe even contemporary slavery, is very much a sort of reliquary stand And I don't know how many of you are devout Catholics, but if you were, you'd understand the importance of the reliquary in Catholic religion as symbol of the divine and of the presence of the martyr. And in that sense, the reliquary becomes the location of the divine in some sense or another, although it reminds one of the suffering and what the saint that is being recognized had to go through. The employment by Christiaan of irony, multiple stylistic and symbolic conventions would identify him as a postmodernist. However, his exhibition manifesto claims otherwise when he invokes the term metamodernism, which, unlike the extreme relativism represented by postmodernism, metamodernism engages, and I quote, with the resurgence of sincerity, hope, romanticism, effect, and the potential for grand narratives and universal truths. Metamodernism is a return to fundamental questions that define our being in the world. And I suppose, in a sense, this is the sort of credo that you need to walk around with when you look at these images, and look very carefully. This could be interpreted, of course, in two ways, this concept of metamodernism, because it allows two very different interpretations. The most blatant example of these is the election of Trump in the United States and the Brexit in the UK, both of which are presenting perhaps archaic, but presented as contemporary new grand narratives in the world. Self-determination, irrespective of the consequence to others, is perhaps what is most clearly apparent in those meta-narratives presented by such politicians. Fortunately, art in its broadest sense can only be art if it's practiced with sincerity, hope, romanticism, effect, and the confidence in the existence of universal truths. This is perhaps where one gets a bit difficult. What is the universal truth? And perhaps this is where we come into conflict in many respects with the notion of or what religion actually represents. And perhaps this is where Christiaan perhaps bumps his head against many of people in society, especially in today's terms, where we have a very dichotomous relation between Christianity and Islam. And in many of those images, you'll see references made to these two grand narratives that are presented as salvations to the world, but yet present only us with conflict and collapse in many societies. So therefore, it's more desperate than ever that one has to reconsider what those meta-narratives are and to what extent they infiltrate our lives today, particularly when they are taken up by what we could call so-called government or the state, and then imposed upon us afterwards. Christiaan's allegories, as I would call them, leave one the opportunity to reflect on one's own life and to reflect on what the future holds. Certainly, it is very topical today, and one can look at, for instance, the 7 deadly scripts, which seem to be a sort of altarpiece in a way, 7 stones or glass, almost tombstone-like things, which reflect on the very scripts that we are handed out on a daily basis, and which eventually may cause our own death. The one being opium, and if you look closer, it's an encased Bible. Is religion the opium of the masses? Does the Bible present us with solutions? Serotonin is the next one, which is a solution to depression, and is widely scripted and given to anybody who feels that they cannot cope with life. My discussion with him was asking, is it effective? He says definitely. But I think for many, this so-called script, this outside application of a chemical substance, isn't necessarily going to be much longer lasting than given temporary relief. The same with the other items like snow, which in anybody's language today is the equivalent of cocaine or drug, perhaps. And there are a few others like PrEP, which I had first heard of the first time, which is presented as an antidote, or let's say almost something that prevents you from getting AIDS or HIV. And then the last one, which I wasn't aware of, D-bol, which is used to enhance one's own bodily shape and beauty. Put together, these 7 deadly scripts are a strong statement about our current society, and contemplated with seriousness and perhaps a little bit of romanticism, one perhaps really thinks about what one's position is. And this is what art really has to do about, is to get people to think outside their box, out of their comfort zones, and reconsider their most deeply held convictions. The last one on those ones is one which I find quite intriguing: social media. Social media has affected many of us. Perhaps many of us try to avoid it. I think a lot of our older population try to avoid it, and fortunately so, perhaps. I don't do social media much myself, and I haven't become the victim of it, but we've seen a few in this country. But social media also provides a space and place for people to express themselves, and it provides a perhaps not a neutral, but at least an open environment for people to engage. Obviously, when used maliciously, causes severe damage in the longer run, and no doubt will and has, particularly in this country, resulted in our government and our state trying to clamp down on it with a new law about secrecy and others. Christiaan's exhibition is perhaps, in a sense, I wouldn't call a cry, but a shout out from an individual in this country that is deeply immersed in art, but also deeply immersed in his concern for the world and the environment. As such, he is a romantic in many respects. He has a faith that we will change. He has a faith that the world can be saved, and perhaps paradise will once again be attained. I certainly would like to support him in that, and I will take a bit of his romanticism with me and hope that he will carry on making exhibitions like this and grabbing our imagination. Make a little bit of effort, kneel down towards the skulls and see your vanity reflected. Enjoy it, know that you can take with you whatever you like, and you can give whatever you want to when interpreting these works. The artist gives you full rein to do so, and please share this with everybody else. I'm very happy to have been here and been asked to open this exhibition, and I think that it's going to go a long way, particularly in this country, to open up and keep what of our most dearest and perhaps most important aspects of our contemporary societies, the freedom to express and the freedom to engage with people. And hopefully this exhibition will once again be one of those landmark instances where this has been sustained and people are reminded of what their real duty is, and is that to recognize each other as equally able and equally capable and equally responsible to engage with each other, perhaps not directly, but through something like art gives us the possibility to say what is unsayable, what is unseeable in a way, and to give perhaps a new path to one day retaining the paradise that we have lost forever. Thank you, Christiaan, and have a great time. This is a great show, and I declare it open. Thank you very much.